I'm learning history in Cleveland, Tennessee. Ocoee Society, 5 Points Museum.
Welcome to the Curious Curators podcast with your hosts, Hope Vollm, Lindsay Shirkey, and Elijah Hammonds. Today we discuss the golden age of the serial killer. Ooh, spooky.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Curious Curators. I'm Hope.
I'm Elijah.
And I'm Lindsay.
And today we have something super exciting for you. It's actually pretty topical as well, I guess.
Is it topical?
I mean, it's popular, so we'll call it
Popular, maybe, not topical.
It is a topic.
It is a topic,
so that makes it topical, I guess.
that a lot of people talk about. So, that is serial killers, and more specifically, the golden age of the serial killer.
Because if you want anything to have a golden age, it's serial killers.
That might be my thought process exactly. And by the golden age of the serial killer, the main kind of time period that we're talking about here is going to be like the late 1960s all the way through the 1980s. So that's, a good 2 decades plus a little bit extra. And we kind of are limiting what we're talking about to people that probably killed more than 2 people. So in 2005, the FBI said that serial killers were going to be people that unlawfully killed 2 or more victims in separate events. But that kind of left a lot of people. And even with the criteria that I put up, I found 126 cases. But so we're saying that same time period, 3 or more people.
126 all over the world or just in the U.S.?
Just in the U.S., all really. Right. I didn't necessarily write down the ones from all over the world, though I will mention a few later. But I will say that I kind of picked the U.S. for that number because 76% of all known serial killers in the 20th century were in the United States. That's a fair bit. And like I said, I only counted people that were kind of convicted of killing more than 3 people.
Yeah. It's a bummer. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, and I mean, really, though, there have been serial killers kind of all the way throughout history, but they just haven't really been called that. Kind of serial killer as a term, or Syrian mortar. Did I say that right, Lindsay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty close,
yes. Yeah. Was kind of coined by a German criminologist. His name was Ernst Gannat, and that was in the 1930s. So...
Was there a lot of that going on in Germany?
In the 1930s?
In the 1930s. Was there a lot of murder going on in Germany in the 1930s?
That's a good question. It sounds like a question for another podcast.
Yeah.
But, yes, in a word. And then it was kind of first used in the Oxford English Dictionary in the 1960s. But, I mean, clearly we can say that there have been serial killers throughout history. Elizabeth Bathory was possibly the first female serial killer, they say, and very prolific.
Well, yeah, and the possibly kind of comes from this idea that she may have been propagandized as a serial killer because she was a powerful woman at that time period. There is the possibility, like many Roman emperors actually, and that she was propagandized as a monster and that she was killing all these women when in fact she wasn't doing any of that. And this is just something that's become so entrenched in our historical knowledge that we can't even prove that it's wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, at this point, like, history is written by the victor, and she kind of lost. So there's no way to know for sure about her. But then we also have people like Jack the Ripper, and the Axemen of New Orleans,
which is definitely one of my favorite stories to kind of go through. Just so you guys know, quick tidbit, the Axemen of New Orleans went around killing mostly Italian couples in their homes with a hatchet or an axe that he found in their homes. And he wrote a letter to the newspaper at one point and said, I'm going to pass over this town on Tuesday, and any house that is playing jazz music, because I'm a lover of jazz music, I will pass over. And that Tuesday night, nobody was murdered. I don't know if that's because that could have been a troll.
Lots of jazz.
He could have just taken the night off.
Yeah, it could have.
Or everyone was playing jazz music.
But, I mean, honestly, a very interesting way to, like, pick your victim. If you don't play jazz music, like, we done. That's it.
Yeah.
It's all over.
Yikes.
So, I mean, there have been, some crazy, interesting cases kind of all throughout history. I kind of wrote down the Hart brothers. They were highwaymen in the United States in the 1700s.
But we don't really consider highwaymen to be serial killers.
See, I don't. No, I don't. I would think that was just more of kind of a crime of opportunity or something. But these guys are kind of thought of as the first American serial killers, which kind of leaves off like a...
But not H.H. Holmes.
Right. So this was before H.H. Holmes, even though H.H. Holmes was, like, really, like, in it.
Because he's usually tagged as the first American serial killer.
And he was not a highwayman or anything else. He was really, like... He built a mansion, man. He built a murder mansion, and that takes a lot of dedication. So he was really, really bad.
Yeah, we don't really call a lot of these people who their main goal is robbery or something similar, and they kill multiple people. We don't call them serial killers.
No, not. It seems like you need, and the FBI's definition doesn't actually talk about this, but it seems like you need a motive that isn't robbery or war, because I think that people like Vlad the Impaler are often called a serial killer, but it was a war. So you can't really call him a serial killer at that point. But then again, that's, I guess,
so you would say that to be a serial killer, it'd be more like more selfish motives than that, than like a war, like going, like you're in war and I'm killing all these people and I'm going around and maybe like murdering people in a town versus I just like killing people.
Yeah, I think that serial killers could be called inherently selfish.
Well, okay, yeah, but then it gets really hazy though, because then you have people who are called serial killers, like Black Widows, who murder their husbands for financial gain. Well, they're doing it for financial gain. That's robbing. That's robbery. And then you have people who kill the elderly for their Social Security checks. Yes. Once again, robbery. You have Angels of Mercy who kill people who are suffering, essentially, or kill people in hospitals.
Yeah.
That's supposedly an unselfish motive. Supposedly. on the surface level, that is an unselfish motive. So, those groups of people are still called serial killers.
And I would argue that if, at least for financial gain, maybe not the Angels of Mercy, I think they're a little bit... Like, I think that could even be its own category. But I think for the financial gain, you pick your target. They pick their targets for a reason. And then they get close to them, usually, which maybe not always. They get close to them, and then they kill them. Like, that's personal. Like, it gets personal, as I would... Yeah. I mean, I would think. I would...
Well, then you have opportunity killers as well, who simply...
Like the highwaymen that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, but there are plenty of modern day in the sense 60s, 70s, and 80s who were opportunity killers. They wanted to kill for the pleasure of killing, and just whoever came along was who they were going to kill.
Yeah, I listened to a podcast the other day about Israel Keyes, who...
Oh, yeah,
he just kind of would bury a murder bucket somewhere and then go back and pick a victim later. That was just convenient. He would kind of pick a location. Yeah, it was like so I listened to the Crime Junkie podcast about this on the way to Savannah the other day. And they explain it way better than I will, but just like super quickly, he would fill up a bucket with like a weapon, like zip ties, things like that, bury it, and then it could be up to 2 years. And then he would go back, pick a location near the bucket, and just be like, I'm going to go to a KFC, and just pick a person at the KFC, and that's it, you're done.
Yeah, I just earlier today watched his confession tape.
Oh, he was a little bit, like, that was wild. I listened to parts of it, and I was like, no, sir.
Yeah.
You are too much. But...
So, let's talk a little bit about the social context of this golden age.
Yeah, why...
As you described it.
Why the 60s, 70s, and 80s? Why was this the golden age?
Well, I think there's so much that we could mention, but... Like, if we just kind of think of it as comparative to now, the media was kind of on that. Like, the media helped them then, but, like, now, none of this would really put you on the front page. None of the things that these people did would really make you front page news. So I think that's, like, kind of important to point out that the media
glamorized it?
Yeah, sensationalized it.
Yeah.
But also, just, like, definitely more obvious things. People had the ability to disappear so much easier than we do today.
Mm-hmm.
I have... Rodney Alcala as a example of that. He was known as the dating game killer.
Yeah.
He literally kidnapped and raped a little girl in California. The police were knocking on his door at that time, like during the crime, and he walked out the back door, moved to New York, started calling himself John Berger, and got a job at an all-girls summer camp and went to film school at NYU, enrolled in college.
Yikes.
And
yeah, cross state lines and you're
insane.
a ghost.
yeah, like I think that has so much to do with it. I mean, as like a normal person, I don't know how in the world you would accomplish something like that today, but that's crazy. Like you could just walk out the door and go to New York from California. So
Start a new life.
yeah, and go to college, like no questions asked.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely part of it.
And people were a lot more trusting in strangers. Hitchhiking was a lot more popular. You know, those kind of nomadic lifestyles, that hippie lifestyle was
Yeah.
so very popular at that time. People just becoming people of the road and hitchhiking their way.
Man.
Yeah.
People love
But-
you and love others.
Yeah. You know, keeping doors unlocked and picking up hitchhikers or getting into a car with somebody you didn't know was a lot more prevalent back then, because today I feel like we're so much more paranoid about that stuff.
Yeah, and
Could be because of this.
Exactly.
yeah, like I mean, if you just think about just kind of bringing this back to a good pop culture reference, if you remember movies that talk about, there's literally a movie called The Hitchhiker about an evil hitchhiker, and then you also have things like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That's a movie about a hitchhiker, like that just starts this whole thing. So, and we grew up our whole lives with movies like that. Like, I would never.
And these movies came out in like the 70s.
Yeah, like I would never. I sit in my own house with my door locked. Like I'm not trusting at all. So it's astounding to me. My parents are like, no, why would we lock the door?
Oh my God.
They're like, we have to let the dog out. No, like lock your doors all the
Lock it
time.
when you let your dog out. Maybe.
They leave their main front door open, just have the screen door closed. No.
Well, and now we also have crime shows as well that teach you how many ways people can get into your life.
Yeah. Like,
that make you really paranoid. And those became popular in the late 90s, early 2000s.
yeah, and I mean, honestly, crime rates were pretty low until about 1965, and then urban crime started rising so much, like that by 1970 it was a real issue. And I mean, I guess we all kind of live in a relatively urban area. This is a small city, but like at some point we've all lived in like a very big city, and I think the mentality in big cities today is very different than it would be in a small town. But
For sure.
if you were changing from like very low crime in the 1960s and well from the 40s to the 60s, so post World War II, and then all of a sudden they tell you to be afraid, like why would you listen? You're like, nothing's happened to me yet, so why would you kind of change your whole way of thinking just in case, I guess.
Yeah.
And like there wasn't something like the FBI having like people that went out to hunt serial killers, like police departments that couldn't share information back then.
Right.
So there was this like cutoff. Like if you were here so say we're here in Bradley County, but something happens, you know, that has the same kind of thing in like Cobb County, Georgia. Sorry that I drove through there the other day and it just stuck in my head. Like you wouldn't know. You might not even know that those crimes were connected, but it's just right down the interstate.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times it was just easy to, if you moved around enough, like no one really tied anything together.
Yeah. And there were a lot of serial killers who hunted on interstates.
Yeah,
and
and
highways.
I mean, I'm still scared to stop at rest stops. Like I still get like dead jumpy to stop at a rest stop because
Yeah, rest stops are kind of scary sometimes. Sometimes they're nice.
But I mean, before like 7 o'clock at night, I will stop at a rest stop.
That's fair.
Afterwards,
Okay, yeah. After that, it's like
you couldn't pay me. Like I will
there's
stop at a gas station because they're lit, or I'll just die and wait. Like
who was you were talking to me about? There was someone, or we may not even know who it is, but there was a highway in Alaska, or was it Canada?
Canada, the Highway of Tears.
The Highway of Tears. We listened to that podcast, but I think Lindsay wrote down quite a bit of information about that.
Oh, quite a bit is a stretch. But basically, the Highway of Tears is Highway 16 in British Columbia, Canada. It's a 450-mile stretch of road where women tend to go missing or end up murdered. Most of them are First Nations people. And And they've been going missing since 1970, I think was their first recorded case of somebody going missing on that road. There have been multiple arrests and convictions of people who have been attached to like a few of those serial murders, but not all of them. And there could be up to 83. So the question is, are those... Is that one serial killer, or is that a great place? Is that great hunting ground? Because a lot of these women were, runaways, or they were hitchhiking, especially in the 70s and 80s, or were in some other way, especially First Nations women, endangered in that kind of sense. Because First Nations women are a lot more likely to be victims of violence than any other group.
Yeah, so they kind of become an easy target, especially if you're on like a long, lonely road.
Yeah.
I don't know much about that part of Canada, I'll be 100% honest, but I would assume this is
it's
a very
pretty
long,
desolate.
a long...
This isn't
empty
Vancouver.
road.
This is
Right.
mid-British Columbia, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
This podcast is a production of the Alderman Group and the Museum Center at 5 Points. Be sure to check out all our upcoming events on our website at museumcenter.org. That's museumcenter.org. Let's continue with the show.
Yeah, and it's so sad that I've heard, I think that they still have billboards up that tell people, like, do not hitchhike here. Like, this is very dangerous. And
Even today, that's crazy.
And I guess sometimes people just feel like they don't have a choice, or I also think that a lot of times that's never going to happen to me.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that. I tell myself that all the time. I'm like, girl, you safe. Nothing's ever going to happen to you. You lock your doors. But, clearly that's not true. Yeah. And I think that that's kind of the case with a lot of, victims of serial killers. No, you never hear them be like, she was scared of serial killers. Like, she was so worried.
Is that how you're keeping yourself protected?
I really hope so. So, because, there's just so many that it's just like, no, they were safe. But, if you're that safe, how do you become a victim? I think it's...
Yeah.
So, you never know. I think that's that whole you just can't trust anyone. You just never know. Because I wrote down Myra, Hindley, and Ian Brady. So, they are the Moors murderers. They were actually a little bit before the time period that we decided on, but I kind of wrote them down anyway because they were a couple who murdered together. She was kind of the lure, so she would get... And it was, kids, they wanted, they could get these kids, so she was kind of the lure. She would can you help me find my lost glove, which
what,
the ogre of the Ardennes did something similar. His wife would lure young girls for him, and later the wife and his baby, she would go with her baby in a carriage and lure them.
See, I always wonder, I'm not the type of person that would be helpful if you were well, Ted Bundy did the same thing, right? Can you help me move my sailboat into the car? If you asked me that, I would say no. But if you were I got a dog over here, I'd be like, ooh, can I come see it? Done. Yeah. But I always wonder, with these kind of murderous couples, I always wonder, is it a perfect storm? If they hadn't met?
Most women serial killers are actually part of a couple. That's... only 15% of serial killers are women, and material gain is their most common motive, so they tend to be more like angels of mercy or poisoning their husband or their children for insurance money.
Yeah.
And they're usually close to their victims, but a lot of the time they are in a couple. Because I was really struggling to find examples of female serial killers who didn't murder their families or weren't in a couple. That was almost impossible.
Yeah,
nurses...
agree.
I tended to see a lot of nurses who would kill their patients. Eileen Wuornos was the only one I could find from this time period who just did it any male serial killer would.
Yeah, and they actually just had a new show about her come out. My mom watched it the other day. She said it was quite good. But if you guys remember, the movie Monster was about her.
Right.
With Charlize Theron. Mm-hmm. And that one that's a little bit, it's kind of scary. It's...
So, while we're kind of on this topic, though, I want to dispel, this myth that serial killers are highly intelligent. Actually, the average IQ of, I think they tested 200 serial killers. The average IQ was 89.
Which is low
Low.
average.
Yeah.
Low average.
Average is 100, and they consider a normal range to be 85 to 115. So they're definitely at that low end.
Why do you think that there's been that stereotype?
I
Just
think we
because they got
popularize-
away with it so much,
I think
or-
we popularize the smart ones because there are smart serial killers.
Yeah.
And I think we tend to glamorize the smart ones and put them on a pedestal. And I think it's also that exactly what you said, not getting caught.
Well, and there's some like some of them are like relatively smart because you had was it Ted Bundy defended himself in court.
Yeah.
And he was like very smart. And
But see
he's-
how glamorized he is.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
very famous. You know, Zac Efron just made that film Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile about Ted Bundy. And I think, like, having someone like Zac Efron
Right.
portray that, you're like, wow.
Troy Bolton.
Exactly.
Troy
God.
Bolton is...
Exactly. But if you've ever seen that picture of Ted Bundy and he's, like, leaning on the doors... he's like leaning in a doorway and he's got his arms up and he,
Right.
I mean, he looks attractive and you're just like, oh, okay, I can see that he's normal.
That would make sense. This makes sense that this man was able to get away with
yeah,
these
like
things.
who would have suspected him?
Who would have?
Well, I actually was watching confession tapes this morning, and I watched the confession of the BTK killer, and he honestly looked like my insurance agent. And he talked about it like he was just talking about how he got groceries on a Sunday.
That's
Like he was very, and it was very interesting because he talked about it. He said, "Well, I was most concerned about the dog, so I asked them to get the dog out of the room." This was after he had the family at gunpoint, so one of the children took the dog out of the room because he was concerned about the dog. Then when he was like, "Well, I tied them up and they started complaining about their bindings, so I loosened them some." And the father, Mr. I think it was Otoro, had recently had a cracked rib, so I put like a parka under him and a pillow so that he was more comfortable. And then I realized that they'd seen my face. So I knew then I had to shoot all of them. And I was like, what? He was talking about it so nonchalantly, and he was like, so I shot all of them, and I took the daughter down into the basement, and I hung her. And it just
Like
very...
it's casual conversation.
Yes.
like what I did. Like I'm telling you guys about my trip to Savannah this weekend, but like I accidentally killed a whole family on the way.
Yeah.
Like
Which you didn't do.
no, which I totally
Record.
didn't do.
And he kind of talked about, and they were just asking him in court, and he was just very casually answering. But the whole point of it was he looked so normal. Like, he actually does look like my insurance agent. And
Hilarious.
he was a family man. He had a son, and, you know, that's one of the ways he kind of lured people as well. I think that was him.
I think it's strange just how, like, in most of the I mean, there's a couple that you look at them and you're like, okay.
Obviously.
Like, wow, you're scaring me just in this photo. But, like, if you look at a lot of these people, they look normal. They look too normal. Like, they just look like we could be pals. Like, they look totally normal. Like, you would walk past them every single day. And, like, people are even like, no, they were cool. Like, they were real nice. Even Charles Manson looks, I mean...
I disagree with that. I don't think he looks normal.
Okay.
Even in the context of the 60s and 70s.
Okay, Jim Jones. He looked normal.
Okay.
Jim-
Jones
Relatively.
looked more normal.
Okay, looking at that picture of Charles Manson, maybe not. It's the eyes.
But, so, let's just talk about a few of the cases as well. I know we've intermingled them so far, but the stuff that I'm most interested in are things that are unsolved. For example, the Bible Belt Strangler, which was the redheaded murders. Bible John in Scotland.
Bible John, just a fun fact about me. Bible John used to find his victims at the Barlands Ballroom in Glasgow, and I have been there. And a friend of mine was like, Bible John used to ply his trade here. And she said that to me as I walked down this long cement hallway to the bathroom alone. And that was a little bit terrifying.
Yeah.
But Bible
good
John was
friends.
never caught.
Yeah, he was apparently never caught unless he was Peter Tobin. But
Right.
he was called that because he would recite Bible verses to people.
Yeah.
As he was killing them?
No, he
No.
would pick up
Or did he
girls.
just-
So
Yeah.
the Barlands used to be like a dance hall, is now like a music venue. But yeah,
He would pick up girls there. One of them, he actually shared a car with the victim and her sister, and the sister relayed this information about him on his appearance and how he recited Bible verses and would constantly quote back to Bible verses, but he let the sister go. Like, they shared a ride together. He killed the victim, and sister didn't touch her.
And didn't even care that she'd seen his face.
Yeah.
And all the cab drivers saw their faces.
Saw his face, yeah.
Like, it was...
Weird.
And this was in the 60s, right?
Yep, 1968 to 1969.
Yeah, so, which is, coincidentally, I think the same time that Peter Tobin was in Glasgow.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure. Don't quote me on that. But I think another interesting one is Edmund Kemper. They called him the co-ed killer.
Mm-hmm.
So he had 10 victims between 1964 and 1973. But he actually started out at age 15 when he murdered his grandparents, like, in the front yard. Like, he just shot them. And so he was kind of one that picked up hitchhikers and then, like, strangled them. And, you know, he was actually serving, or is serving, 8 concurrent life sentences at the California medical facility. And he's even given interviews that kind of help people understand a serial killer's mind. But something that kind of threw me for a loop when I was doing this research is, you guys have heard about, like, books on tape, right? They're really popular now, like Audible and all that. Edmund Kemper was one of the people that read for the books on tape. So if, like, you had, this was a while back, but you could get a book read to you by Edmund Kemper, the serial killer.
Oh my gosh.
I know, isn't that creepy?
Hello.
And that means that he
Cringy.
had, like, a very, like, nice voice, I would assume, because you wouldn't want, like, someone like me reading you an audiobook. So he had to have had, like, I think they're usually relatively soothing. So that's a little bit...
That's concerning.
Yeah, that makes me a little bit nervous. Like, I don't want to listen to audiobooks anymore because...
When I was looking into different cases of serial killers, I stopped at... Actually, my wife mentioned... She said Buffalo Bill, and I was like, what do you mean Buffalo Bill? Like, that's the dude from, like, the 1800s, like, the... Whatever. But I was like, that doesn't make sense. What are you talking about? But she was talking about Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
The guy
Yep.
that they keep referencing in Silence of the Lambs, whose actual name was Gary Heidnik. And he was... This is who... They did a pretty accurate portrayal of who this man was. Like, in the movie, you have the pit where this woman's trapped. He ended up actually murdering 6 women, I believe, and they were all black women that he murdered, and he made them torture each other. He electrocuted them. And the thing that I found so just, it's so weird, is that one of the women died of starvation, and then he was sort of trying to dispose of her body, and her arms actually fell off because they were like, she was like starting to decompose, and her arms fell off, and then he froze her arms, put them in his freezer, and then started using it as like dog food. And the police were actually called because he was being suspected of, like, okay, like, what's going on with this guy's house? Police came by because of an odor, and he said...
Isn't that always the case? There's always somebody smelled an odor.
I'm cooking a roast. I fell asleep, and it burned. That was his excuse, and the police left, and then eventually they caught him, they came back, and, like, it's been this whole huge thing. But I was like, the police left because he burnt a roast?
Right,
How could
like...
it...
See, I've seen so many of these doing my research where, like, they were arrested. They were in jail.
Yeah.
Or the police were right there. And I'm not saying that, like, the police aren't doing their job or anything like that.
No.
But, like, they could have, so many things could have stopped.
Been prevented, yeah.
Like, I read about Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Ripper. In basically the middle of his killing spree, he was in jail for theft, and he was only there for 3 months. He killed 52 people. In the middle of his killing spree, he got arrested, and they let him out. And he went on to kill the next half. Yeah, he was convicted of 52.
That was the same thing when I was looking into John Wayne Gacy. He was placed in jail, I believe, twice, and got out for good behavior. And that's when he started doing the really kind of twisted stuff with Pogo the Clown and all of that stuff, where he's killing and doing awful things to little boys, and then you find out that he buried 33 boys in his house.
Yeah, like, it's astounding to me just how many of them actually went to jail or were like being watched.
Well, and there are a lot of instances where you have a victim who comes forward and says, this person did this to me, and the police don't believe them.
That's true.
I believe that happened in Jeffrey Dahmer's case. Is one of the teenage boys got away, went to the police and said, this is what happened, and they went to Jeffrey Dahmer and said, well, what's your side of the story? Oh, that didn't happen.
He's like, that's my boyfriend, and he's just like, he's just like, we're having a fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's astounding, and I think that might go back a little bit to like the trust of that time. Like you don't want to. I don't think I would ever want to believe like that somebody was actually just sitting here telling me this. I'd be like, no, that can't be right. But like clearly it is right. Clearly that happens.
And it could have even gone into the distrust of children at the time and the trust of parents, like sort of trusting parents more than you trust like a kid. Like so in John Wayne Gacy's case, it's like these little kids are sort of saying like this is happening, and people are like, yeah, right.
Yeah, you're lying.
Surely that's not happening. You're a child.
Or like, well, they ran away, so like they were bad kids anyway.
Yeah, that's another one.
And it's like, but that's like not the case at all. Just because like someone leaves home or something doesn't give you any right to make them a victim of your serial killing spree. But I think that like now, you know, we have a lot of kind of things at our fingertips, I guess, to like help us out. We can call 911. Actually, most of us can call 911 as of 2017. Only 89.9% of America had access to 911, which means that 1.1% doesn't. So I don't know what you do if you're there. But we at least have that because I know that there have been a lot of cases where people would say, like, yeah, I heard that, or yeah, I saw something. Why didn't you call the police? Well, I didn't know the number. You know, like, people just kind of use that as an excuse, and having something like 911 in theory helps you because it gives you the tools to reach one number, and it's not really that hard to remember.
Yeah.
But
same with DNA. DNA has advanced to the point where we're able to catch people more frequently, and
now you have
like
fingerprint databases, and you also, speaking of DNA, is a lot of people who do that 23andMe and Ancestry.com have started. Those companies can share that information with police departments to track you through family lines. So if you're a murderer and your DNA is on file and like your cousin decides to submit to 23andMe, then all of a sudden you have access to that database. That's how they found the, I think it was the Golden State Killer.
Yeah. And that was super recently.
But he was active during this golden age of serial killers.
Yeah, and they couldn't figure. And he was like a former police officer, I think. Was that what he was?
That might
be the right one. He was a former police officer, and so he kind of knew how not to get caught. But when he was doing all of this, like DNA wasn't around, so there was no way to like definitively track that. I think they can like blood type if you leave blood, they can check your blood type to narrow it down like that. But then you would also have to take the blood type of everyone, and that, you know, it becomes like so, and then it's only like however many people have type A or type B blood. But with DNA, you're really able to like find a person. And what is it, like CODIS? It has this says what, over 13 million samples, which is astounding. But I also read that if you're not convicted of a crime, they're not supposed to store your DNA there. So like, I'm not sure how they have 13 million, but I don't know. Also, if you're a suspected terrorist, now they can take your DNA and store it there, which was kind of put through by the Patriot Act.
And I think a lot of research on serial killers came from this golden age as well. So now we kind of understand the signs more.
Yeah, there's so much. It's, you know, it's really wild that there's so much about them, and it's basically been being researched since all of this started happening. But, you know, they can They do something called a psychopathy checklist, which if you guys remember the other day in the office, I took this as well just to see. And it told me that I am not a psychopath, which I actually wrote
beg to differ.
in my notes. I wrote that in my notes. So, and
You wrote I'm not a psychopath in your notes just to remind you?
Yep,
I took the test.
So did.
Psychopathic.
Good.
So I took the test, and it was this super basic. So I'm really not sure if this test would tell you much because, and also it's kind of been said that not all psychopaths are serial killers and not all serial killers are psychopaths.
Right.
So, like, does it even matter? I just kind of thought it was interesting, honestly. And it's things like, are you impulsive? Are you irresponsible? Do you manipulate people? And you can take it for yourself or for someone else. So
that doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
to me. You can't take a test for somebody else.
Yeah, so, like, I mean, are you just going to be like, yeah, I think that he lies, but maybe he, just...
Yeah, because how do you know that person's motives behind, like...
Exactly.
Are they manipulating, or did they just... I don't know.
Yeah, like, I don't think there's any way, and especially if, like, someone thinks that you're guilty of something, they're going to answer things that specific way.
Yeah.
But really one of the kind of interesting things that I was looking for, especially because we've been seeing a lot of stuff recently coming around that's, like, linking, I'm so sorry, your zodiac sign to being a serial killer.
God.
And then the book that the two of us were, or the three of us were talking about how they were linking wartime to the rise of serial killers and everything. But there's no demographic group that's more likely or less likely to become serial killers.
The popular image is of a white male in his middle age. Well, the age maybe, but it's found that white men aren't serial killers any more than any other race. They are just more represented, one, because crimes against white people, and serial killers tend to commit crimes against people of their own race.
Right.
Black serial killers tend to kill black people, white serial killers kill white people, etc. Usually. Not every time. But the media, especially, the media tends to focus on when the victims are white, and especially young white women or white children. So you see a lot more of them in the media for that reason, and because in the U.S., whites make up the majority.
Right. So it's easier.
But I think the proportion of black serial killers in the U.S. is something like 16%, and that matches about the demographic.
Yeah.
I think in the South, people tend to think that the demographics are skewed more evenly, but whites make up, I think, about 70% of the U.S.
All right, so there's clearly so much more that we could say here. I think I could probably stay here for hours, but I know that no one else has that kind of time. So thanks so much for listening, guys, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Be sure to join us next time as we talk all things history and tell the story of the Ocoee region.
I'm learning history in Cleveland, Tennessee. Ocoee Society, 5 Points Museum, telling the story of our history, coming together as community. I'm learning history in Cleveland, Tennessee. Ocoee Society, 5 Points Museum, telling the story of our history, coming together as community. I'm learning history